He sees it all. He will surely lift up the righteous. Today's focus, Mordecai receives honor. Find Foods, 7 minutes a day, 1 Bible a year. Grace and peace, everyone. Our reading today brings us to Esther, chapters 5 through 8. Our key verse is, "What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" The king asked. "Nothing has been done for him," his attendants answered. Esther 6. Earlier, we mentioned that Mordecai was Esther's adoptive father and that Esther became queen. Before that, one night, when the king could not sleep, he ordered the book of the Chronicles to be read to him. It happened to mention that Mordecai had uncovered a plot to assassinate the king, an act that should have earned him a reward, yet nothing had been done. Perhaps it seemed like a coincidence. The king couldn't sleep, and that particular passage was read, but in truth, everything was in God's hands. The book of Esther tells the story of how the Jewish people were delivered during the time of exile. Although the entire book never mentions the name of the Lord, it is filled with accounts of his wonderful works. Because the wicked official Haman was angry with Mordecai and wanted to use his position to take personal revenge, God brought about two things. One was that Mordecai's merit was recognized, and the other was that Esther appeared before the king and exposed Haman's plot. When Esther risked her life to appear before the king, she did not expose the plot directly. Instead, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet. It was at the second banquet that she revealed Haman's plan to destroy her people. Brothers and sisters, do you see the contrast here? Earlier, Mordecai had saved the king. Now, Mordecai, Esther, and their people were saved. So there is a clear parallel between the two events. In the end, the wicked Haman was executed, and Mordecai was elevated to the second highest position in the kingdom. Mordecai was a righteous man. Living in the midst of it all, he quietly walked in integrity, never seeking credit for himself. He could not stand Haman's arrogance and abuse of power, and refused to kneel before him. He held fast to his righteousness and refused to flatter the powerful, and God was with him. The message of Esther is God reigns behind the scenes to bring salvation. Today, the structure of Esther takes us to the reversal of fortune and the celebration of Purim. This deliverance became a Jewish festival called Purim. Let us look at the scripture. God's hand makes a way. That night, the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. The king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. His attendants answered, "Haman is standing in the court." "Bring him in," the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought to himself, "Who is there that the king would rather honor than me?" Esther 6. The king's sleepless night and the reading of the Chronicles, as we just mentioned, was truly God's wonderful arrangement. It just so happened that the king could not sleep, and it just so happened that the passage about Mordecai was read. Mordecai and the queen had saved the king's life. Meanwhile, Haman was plotting something evil. He had prepared a pole. In the Old Testament, the pole was used for execution and carried the meaning of a curse. He had prepared this pole for Mordecai, but in the end it was prepared for himself. Because Haman was second in rank to the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" They thought the king was talking about Haman, but he was not. At this point, Haman's plot had not yet been exposed, but Mordecai had already received honor. Haman's scheming backfired. What he intended for evil turned into good for Mordecai. So he answered the king, "For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate. But Haman rushed home, with his head covered in grief, and told Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had happened to him. They said to him, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." Esther 6. For others, trying to be clever backfires. But for Mordecai, Haman's scheming backfired in reverse. It actually brought Mordecai honor and reward. This greatly increased Mordecai's influence and the weight of his words going forward. When Haman went home and told his wife and friends what had happened, they recognized it as a sign that his downfall had begun. In fact, it was also a prophecy. God can move his own people, and he can also move the Gentiles to speak prophetic words. And indeed, that is exactly what happened. God watches over and protects the righteous behind the scenes. The Lord makes firm the steps of the one who delights in him. Though he may stumble, he will not fall, for the Lord upholds him with his hand. Psalms 37. There is a worship song that puts it well. God never promised skies always fair. It does not mean there will be no rain, no hardships, or even that we will never stumble. But the righteous, those whom God delights in, though they stumble, they will not fall, for God upholds them with his hand. Let us continue with Psalm 91. Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. Psalms 91. To dwell in the shelter of the Most High does not mean that no one can see him. People can still see him. But being in that shelter is like being under his shadow, under his protection. God works behind the scenes, making himself our refuge, so that we will not fall, we are protected, and we are upheld. In the end, through these two events, Mordecai being elevated to honor and Esther risking her life to appear before the king and exposing Haman's plot at the banquet, Haman was hung on the very pole he had prepared, and Mordecai became second in rank to the king. The Jewish people were delivered through Esther, a beautiful ending. After this came the return. Reading Guide to Esther. The message of Esther is God reigns behind the scenes to bring salvation, set in the exile age. Chapter 5. Esther hosts a banquet for the king and Haman. Chapter 6. The Persian king honored Mordecai. Mordecai receives honor. Chapter 7. Haman is executed. Esther's victory and deliverance. Chapter 8. The Jews struck back under a new decree. Because the king's decree, once sealed with his signet ring, could not be revoked, not even by the king himself. The original decree had already been issued, calling for the destruction of the Jews throughout the empire. So the solution was to issue a new decree. The Jews were permitted to defend themselves and strike back. In the end, they were protected, and Haman's evil scheme came to nothing. Today's focus: Mordecai receives honor. Mordecai quietly held fast to his integrity, raising and instructing Esther, and in doing so, saved the entire Jewish people. Blessed is the one whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night. Fine food 7 minutes. See you tomorrow.